This is Comic Shenanigans, episode 1070, a conversation with Chris Giarrusso.
Ain't no stopping them shenanigans. Love getting into shenanigans. All up in them shenanigans. 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 Shenanigans.
Welcome to the Comic Shenanigans podcast. I'm your host, Adam Chapman. This is episode 1070. It's a conversation with Chris Giarrusso. I'm very excited to have Chris back on the show. He is the one who is responsible for creating one of my favorite things that Marvel's ever done, which is the mini Marvels, or bullpen bits back in the day. So it was tremendously enjoyable to be able to have Chris back on the show. He has been on the show once in the past, although this was like 6 years ago, which, especially in the post-pandemic era, feels like even more of a lifetime ago. He was in episode 606 way back in the day. This would have been from September 2018, so you should check out the back catalog and listen to that, and then jump into this episode where I talked to him about everything that's happened in the last 6 years, basically. So this was tremendously enjoyable. I hope you enjoy this as well. You can email me at comicshenanigans@gmail.com, rate the show on Apple Podcasts, listen to us on Apple Podcasts, and also listen to us on Spotify. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you next time. Bye-bye. Chris, welcome back to the Comic Shenanigans podcast. How are you today?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for coming back to the show. For people who may not have caught your first appearance, it was a little while ago. It was back in August 2018. So not much has happened over the last 6 years, right?
No, it's just business as usual. Nothing significant to discuss that has happened in that window of time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things actually I want to chat with you about, because it's been an interesting, period of time. Sometimes it's my favorite thing is to have creators on and then have them come back a few years later, and you can kind of see what's happened in the interim. So, when we last talked, I think issue 6 of Encounter was just about to come out, and obviously that went on for a little longer. Now there's 2 trade paperback collections. So looking back on the Encounter experience, what is your primary takeaway?
I don't know. I haven't thought about Encounter in quite a while. I don't even know what the takeaway was. It was fun to work with Franco and Art. But yeah, I guess Lion Forge. I'm not even sure, how does Lion Forge exist anymore? Did they get bought out by
that's a good question.
company?
I'm actually not sure if they really do. I think they do.
Yeah, I guess somebody bought them, or they bought somebody else, and so I don't know. I guess, none of them.
Oh, it looks like it. Sorry, I'm wrong. It looks like they went defunct 5 years ago, and the publishing duties were transferred to Oni Press.
Oni. Right. Yeah,
that makes sense, because I think the second Encounter trade paperback was published by Oni. Now that I think about it.
Okay. Well, yeah. So we if they're interested in I don't know if they even. I don't even know if they know that they have the book, that they have Encounter over there or whatever. But Franco has been busy. I've been busy. Art's been busy. So we're all doing our own things.
Of course. I will say, as I remember when we talked about it, I remember picking it up, and then I enjoyed it, but I actually was surprised my son really took to it. So, it's funny, that's why to me it doesn't seem that long ago, because I see Encounter fairly often, because my son will take it off the shelf, he'll be reading it. So it's funny because it has a continued presence in my home, but I guess, as a publishing venture, it has been a while.
Well, I'll take it. That, to me, that's all the accolades we need, is that, it's the kid that doesn't know anything about what's popular or what's not. They just know what they like. If they give us the thumbs up, that's all I care about.
For sure.
Well, so that's not all I care about, but it definitely makes me feel better.
For sure. Absolutely. So in and around that period, then you were also working on #Danger with Tom Pyre, and I'm curious, what was it like working with Tom?
It was great. Tom's been around. He's a veteran, and he's also a hometown hero. for me. He's from Syracuse. I'm from Syracuse. So I got a big kick out of working with him, and I love his sense of humor. So it was a really good fit creatively.
I know we talked last time, and I asked a bunch of questions about, how it was for you, because obviously someone who, especially the way that I came to know you originally, which was we've talked about before, was with the mini marvels and the bullpen bits, and I kind of knew you more as, you were everything. You were the writer, you were the artist of the script, you kind of put it all together, and then working with other people, and you're supplying the art, but you are working with other people who have different writing sensibilities. I'm curious, when you're working on projects like Encounter or like #Danger, what was the difference in kind of script like when you're getting it from Martin Franco versus Tom Pyre?
Tom Pyre would, he just gave me a typewritten script, kind of pretty standard. Like I said, he's a veteran. He's been editing and writing for, I don't know, 20, 30 years, maybe more, 40 years now. But Art and Franco, they kind of have more like a shorthand style, and they kind of write in pictures since they both draw. So the scripts I would get from Franco were like really like a lot of thumbnailed out, like real stick figure, word balloon stuff in there with descriptions of what's happening. So it is significantly different, but they both made perfect sense to me. So they were real easy.
That's what matters, right?
Yeah.
I'm curious which one you found was more natural. Like, do you like having more kind of say on kind of how to frame things and what you're going to be trying to do in the panel, or did you like having a little bit more of a, kind of rough direction in terms of the thumbnails?
It's hard to say what I prefer. I enjoyed both scenarios. Tom's pretty clear with like his scripting, what it was, but Franco, said, Franco told me, he said, take all this and change whatever you want. And so like sometimes, so there were a couple times where I call him up and I'd say, all right, like this is what you gave me, but I'm thinking this, and he'd just be like, yeah, whatever you want to do. I'm like, okay. So there was like a little more encouraged freedom. I didn't, not that I didn't feel like free to do, whatever I wanted to do with Tom, but it's just very different, and I don't prefer one or the other. They were both very fun. It's like you like two different sports a lot and you enjoy playing both of them.
That's actually a pretty good analogy then.
Yeah.
Did you find, I guess with Encounter, as you went on, because you did do 12 issues, did you find that as you guys kind of progressed that there was maybe less detail in some of the thumbnails, or that they were able to, obviously they knew what you were like as a cartoonist, but being able to know how you were able to illustrate their words and their story, that they were able to give you less because they knew more about how you could tap into what they were looking for? Did you find there was any evolution there?
I don't remember that. I think it was pretty much this, like, Franco just continued to work, just to crank out his scripts the way he naturally did. He didn't really change it all. No, and I think if anything, maybe he did get a little knowing that like what I was going to pick up, like what he expected me to end up doing, and maybe he was like a little bit less concerned about how tight he was being. But I don't. It's so long ago now.
I know I'm asking you very in-depth questions about a project that is kind of recessed into memory. So let's talk about something a little bit more recent, and this one I'm very curious about, kind of how the collaboration came about. You're working on the Officer Clawsome books, which, again, like, my son is really enjoying them, which I knew he would because he's been a fan of your art since before he even knew, to look at someone's name. Like, he was such a young kid when I started giving him mini marvels and that kind of stuff. So he was already kind of used to some of your aesthetic, and he's read Encounter, Tales from the Con. He's read Officer Clawsome. So I'm curious what the collaboration was like, and how did you come on board the project with Brian Smith?
Well, Brian and I share a studio. Brian, me, and three other guys. Okay. And Brian had gotten himself real busy writing and drawing a series called PB&J at HarperCollins. And they were enjoying working with him, and they wanted more ideas from him, and he came up with Officer Clawsome. but he was still drawing PB&J series, so he couldn't reasonably draw 2 books at once. So but they liked the idea, so he just suggested me to them, and they were like happy to roll with it. But they also wanted the HarperCollins process. They needed to have a complete script before they wanted to give the artist the green light. So Brian still had to write the whole thing, turn it into HarperCollins, go back and forth with them first before it was given to me. So by the time I got it, it was pretty polished. Otherwise, I think we might have had more of a shorthand between us because we get along real well. And again, I think he's one of the funniest people I know. So I had no trouble with his scripts at all. It was just, and which is great because it was like a 240-page marathon or twice. So yeah, it was pretty.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah, it was a lot of work.
So I'm curious about that. So with the first one, so the whole script was completely hammered out and already done before it was even given to you?
Right.
That's so interesting. So because you share studio space, how, and knowing that you were going to be hopefully the artist to draw it, how did you talk with him at all about it, or as it was being developed, or did you just kind of hold it aside and be like, I got something good for you, but not till it's done? I'm curious because obviously with something that has such a big visual component, usually there's a lot more kind of collaboration, especially something this big, this long, right? So I'm curious at what point he was kind of cluing you in more on what he was doing, or was it, was there any collaboration there, or was it just he just wrote the script and then when it was done, he brought it to you?
Well, he was sharing the ideas with me before I was ever even part of the project, before, he even considered, because he was just still at the pitch stage of oh, here's this other idea I have. And, he was sketching out characters and putting his pitch together for Harper. So I remember that happening before they even said yes to it. So, but definitely along the way, every time, anytime he had a gag in mind, he'd come by and run it by me. Oh, I thought of this idea. And it kind of would have been that way regardless. The projects that I don't draw, it's the same way. If he comes up with cool ideas, or if he's stuck with something, or, any of us, we'll just chat about ideas that we're working on. So I wasn't in the dark on it. I pretty much knew what to expect.
Now, obviously with this, with doing these books of these kind and these types of series, they usually do have an aggressive publishing schedule to try and get them out every year and a half or so. And I know I've spoken with Jed Winnick before about his series Hilo, and it's every year it's just booming like clockwork. Every February he's going to have another volume, which is obviously very daunting. But obviously with you and Brian, obviously he's writing it, you're drawing it. When you're doing the first one, how much of it was in your head that, well, this will be a series, I'm going to have to keep doing this length?
Yeah, it was it's a lot of work. Yeah, it was just it's pretty much your whole life for a couple of years. But when we signed on for we signed on for 2 books initially, and then they decided they didn't want to renew after the 2 books. I guess they weren't happy with the numbers maybe, but I'm really proud of the work. I think they're pretty good, but I'm definitely happy to take a break from 240-page books.
I can imagine, especially because there was the series was pretty wild because it went in a lot of different directions. So it's not, you're being tasked with drawing a lot of different types of things, and kind of keeping everything brisk and a lot of different character designs. It feels like a pretty labor intensive project because you're not just dealing with simple models. You're dealing with so many different creatures and, so many different locales, etc. So, I guess as an artist, was that something you were maybe more excited about at the beginning, and then by the end of the 240, you're like, oh my God, what did I just do? Or what was your kind of interpretation on the depth and the complexity of the work?
Initially it was tough because I had never really drawn cartoony fish characters before, and there was a lot of that. So all of that kind of stuff was new to me, but it was just something I had to keep loose and just, once I had all the characters figured out, you draw it over and over and over again. You kind of find your way as you're doing the work. And I got comfortable with it fast enough.
Again, it was visually very expressive because, again, I think because you got to lean into so many different creatures and, like, even the colors are again, very vibrant. It's a very fun and energetic book. I have to say, I'm very disappointed to know that there's not going to be any more. I didn't actually realize that. Because I guess the second one only came out this past April.
Yeah.
So I am sorry to hear that. I'll have to give my son the bad news.
I would say at least artistically, I kind of feel like if you handed that to somebody who's familiar with my other work, that they wouldn't. There'd be no cues in there to make them think that I drew it.
You know, it's interesting you say that because looking at it, I can see what you're saying because, like, I guess what people usually think of your work for, and I don't mean this in a degrading way. I think you would understand this. That at times, a lot of your work has that kind of a really fun kind of Charlie Brown aesthetic in terms of some of the models. And you're right, because you're doing all these creatures, those types of models don't really creep in, so it doesn't maybe have the same telltale signs of what some of your other work has been. If that's fair.
Yeah, that's pretty much exactly what I mean. You know, you're used to seeing little kid superheroes. And there's nothing, like, there's no elements of that are present in the Colosseum books.
I suppose not, because it's all creatures. Now, in the last few years, what I'm really curious about, because one of the last questions I asked you about in the last episode, which again was 6 years ago, that we did together, was kind of the idea of, like, would we ever see any more mini Marvels? And at the time, it sounded like you were very like, no, that's probably that ship has sailed. And that has not been the case. And instead, we've been getting, more mini Marvels here peppered in the last few years. Now you're doing, variant covers, in your style. So what has kind of led to, or what editor is behind kind of bringing you back into the fold?
Well, Devin Lewis, I think first started, picking me up to do like single page strips here and there. I think the first one was for Venom 200, which, was that 2019, 2020, maybe? No, 2021, I think.
I think you're right, yeah. I have to check the exact year, but I think you're right.
Yeah, so it was a page there, and then there was a page in an Elektra book, a page of a Daredevil book, and then Spider-Verse. And then I think it was pretty quiet for a couple of years. And then Jordan White offered me a few pages in Venomverse Reborn #2. So I got to do another Venom strip there. And then he asked if I would be interested in doing variant covers. And, answer that to that. So yeah, absolutely, of course. So it's just, a pleasant surprise, cause like it's, I kind of like knock on the door there every, once in a while. And the answer was always like, yeah, sorry, there's no room here for you. But, this time around it's, turns out that they've had some work. So yeah, all the Venom variants and the X-Men variant covers now are coming soon. And yeah, I couldn't be more thrilled about it. Devin also hired me to do another few pages in Moon Knight. Moon Knight. What was it called? Shades of the Moon Knight? Phases of the Moon Knight, yeah. #3. Yes. I had 4 pages in it.
That's great.
So yeah, like wasn't it very pleasant? No one's more surprised than I am, and pleasantly so.
Yeah. A few questions. So, and this is more of a process question that I'm embarrassed I haven't asked this already. When you're doing your art these days, like, have you moved into the digital space? Are you still doing on the traditional boards? Like, how are you doing your art these days?
It's a good question. The Colosseum books were entirely digital. That's kind of where I kind of learned how to use the iPad for drawing, and it definitely made things go a lot faster.
How was that as like a learning experience to adjust and adapt to something new? And obviously, in the aggregate, would end up being a time saver. But as you were kind of figuring it out, what was that like? Was that kind of fits and starts, or was that fairly simple to? It was a little anxiety.
It was a little bit anxiety inducing at first because I was like, I don't know if I'm going to get the hang of this. I don't know about this. But then, by the end of it, I was like, I don't think I can ever draw on paper again.
Oh, really?
That's an exaggeration, but But yeah, it really is just it's just so much faster and easier. I don't know
Now, when you're
easier,
doing
but definitely faster. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of tricks it does that do make it easier, but it's the speed cannot be ignored.
I'm curious what it's like for you, like when you're coming back to the mini Marvels. It's interesting to look at it now because you can see that you have definitely developed and learned a lot of extra tricks as an artist. Like, for example, the most recent collection that they kind of put out, collecting some of the old mini Marvels, but also some of the newer ones, is in the mini Marvels Spidey Sense trade that came out earlier this year. And it's interesting because you'll have a page of like a classic one, which was the Snowman, which is Spider-Man and Wolverine together, and at the very end they end up getting covered in snow by Storm. And then on the next page you have it juxtaposed with, I believe it was in either the Daredevil or Elektra issue, I forget which one was which, but you have, Daredevil, Elektra as Daredevil, you got Black Panther, Spider-Man, and Iron Fist. It's interesting looking at the character modeling between the two and how much more detailed and developed your take on the characters has been. Was this conscious, or is this just, this is who you are now? You've been developing and getting better, so obviously you're going to be able to do more depth and more details than you were able to do when you started 25 years ago.
Yeah, I think, I'm happy that you consider it an improvement. I agree. I do feel like I have gotten better over the years. And I think it's kind of unavoidable. If you just keep working, you're going to get better. You're going to pick up things. It's just what happens. Like I tell kids when we go to school visits that it's like their handwriting. It's like when you were in first grade, your handwriting was not as good as it is now. It's because you do it every day, and art is the same way. So I think it's just
that's a really good analogy.
Yeah, it's just the getting better as you go.
Now I'm curious, and again, this is a question I feel like I have asked in the past, but I guess with all the mini Marvels, you've always done all your own coloring as well?
Yeah.
So I think that's also where it's very noticeable too, just being able to use more of the digital tools, because obviously the more recent ones are able to implement a wider range of color and different gradients than I guess you were able to do 25 years ago, and that also helps from a visual aesthetic also make it very distinct against when you have all the other kind of classic ones, and you can kind of easily tell really quickly which ones are the more modern, because again, you're implementing newer techniques.
Yeah, Photoshop's been around for a long time. It's existed for my entire career, so there's never been a time I wasn't coloring digitally. So if you're seeing the colors improving also, it's entirely just because I've figured it out a little bit more, like what my approach is than just the tech behind it. I mean, I definitely look at the old stuff. When I look at the old stuff, I definitely look at it and I go, yeah, I didn't know what I was doing with the colors, and now I feel a lot more confident.
I'm curious about with the mini Marvels and how they develop. Because obviously, when they originally were in the bullpen bulletins, like you were kind of, I think what you said before is that they kind of give you a lot of free reign to kind of do cartoons, and that they weren't necessarily having to be of specific characters or models. But now when you're, being tasked with doing a mini Marvels in a specific book, obviously that content is going to reflect what the book is about in some way, or at least with the characters. Do you find that freeing? Do you find that more of a creative challenge? Because like, I'm doing the Venom one, so I have to figure out a fun story to use my interpretation of the Venom characters. Like, I'm curious how you approach that.
It does help to have parameters. Like if the job calls for Venom, then I know, okay, it helps you focus and, narrow your view to like just to get down to like fewer elements rather than, if you have the whole world at your disposal, it's too much. So that could be helpful. That reminds me of Seinfeld and Larry David talking about when they had to write the stand-up bits for the Seinfeld show, and they both said they found it was easier to write the stand-up bits when they had the parameters of like what was happening in the storylines of the actual show. It made it a lot easier to just focus in and write stuff. That it was helpful to have restrictions.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Speaking of some of these more recent ones, I just want to point out some of my favorite bits that you've been doing. I loved the whole concept of the Daredevils. I thought was just such a funny and very accurate kind of take on the strip, and loved especially just Elektra shoving Bullseye off the building at the end, which was a great end gag. So I just wanted to shout out that one because that was a particular favorite.
Thanks.
Now, actually, that brings up a question too, because obviously with the mini Marvels, you've kind of run the gamut because you've done full-length stories, you've done shorter, tighter strips. So now that you're being given kind of a full page, again, is this one of those things where you kind of, you got to just figure out how to fit the page? It's more than just the kind of couple panel kind of gags that you did back in the old days. But you're able to stretch your legs a bit more and kind of tell a full length, well, you know what I mean? Like a full story in a page as opposed to just having a few panels. Do you like having more, real estate, or is that at times more, more of a challenge? Because again, now you have to create more of a thorough line that still has a good, end gag.
I always feel like, whatever it is I'm not doing, I wish I was doing that. I was like, oh man, if I had like more space, I could do it would be so much easier. But then if I'm doing something with a lot more, real estate, a lot more pages to it, I think like, oh my God, how am I ever going to fill this much? It'd be so much easier if I just had like one page, I could just get it over with. So there's definitely strengths and weaknesses to both. And, when it does come together, I'm like, finally, it's always like nerve wracking at first, thinking like, oh, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And then finally you figure it out. It's kind of like solving a puzzle sort of a thing where you get that moment where like, okay, it's going to work. And then you can relax for the rest of the process.
I'm curious it's interesting again, as we said with mini Marvels, like it felt like they were over and now they're back and we're getting periodic more strips that will show up. And it's interesting too that, the series keeps being reprinted. Obviously, the first trade paperback collections were back in 2008. And then a few years ago, there was the Ultimate Collection that kind of put everything in one volume. And now we're and it's interesting, they're all kind of different sizes too. Like the first ones were like digest size. The second one was bigger and wider than that. And now we're getting, thinner collections, but they're multiple that are kind of collecting the newer stuff as well. What is it like for you to see the stuff continue to be reprinted? And have they ever asked you about your preferred like order for the stuff? Because it's really interesting. Like the Ultimate Collection seemed to have more of a thorough line in terms of putting things more or less chronologically, but the new one feels a little bit more like kind of not haphazard per se, but it's not in the original publication order. Has anyone ever asked you about, your preferred method or order to represent your original strips?
No, but I think, I think though, like the newest one, Spidey Sense, is only like half of the material. So they basically split up that Ultimate Collection into 2 volumes, and then the next one coming is going to be Hulk Smash. So I think whatever decisions they made were sensible, and that they're going to put all the Spidey material they had into the Spidey Sense book, and then make sure all the Hulk material winds up in the Hulk Smash book, and then whatever's left over, they just divide it between the 2 books.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting just because with the new collections, I mean, if someone had the old collections and they don't get these new ones, they're missing out on the new stuff. But I don't know if it's really advertised anywhere that this has the new stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've seen that really pushed either. I mean, yeah, I'm glad that you picked up on that, and I'd like to mention that too. But when it comes down to it, it's like I don't know, 10 pages of new stuff maybe, and
true. I mean, they've reprinted things with less.
Yeah, but also, like they got a crazy amount of content that they're constantly publishing all the time. So I understand that mini Marvels isn't the top priority, and I appreciate that they're giving it any attention at all. So no complaints.
One thing, I haven't done a deep dive online, so I'm sure someone has done it properly, but I would like to go back and like have a proper kind of listing of like where all these bullpen bulletins first showed up. I'm sure someone's done that online somewhere in terms of listing kind of where each of them showed up, because I mean, as I've told you before in our last conversation, like it was such a thrill when I was younger to see more of these show up. So you'd be buying a book and boom, there's another Bullpen Bolt, and these were so much fun. And that's why I was so excited when they collected them, because it was just it was something that I always really enjoyed. And I'm so glad that you're being tasked with doing more of them, because I've always thought it was just a criminal shame that they stopped doing mini Marvels, because I never got tired of it. I am 41 now. I enjoy it just as much as I did 25 years ago. And that's just on the strength of your, great approach to gags, your artistic sense, your writing sense. And so, I'm just so glad that you're being given the opportunity to do more, because I feel like they never should have stopped, to be honest.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
So as a heartfelt thanks, as someone who's been a fan for 25 years of seeing these, thank you. And again, I also, my son's really enjoying your work as well, and the various different, ways and things that are being published that you've been working on. It's been a joy to be able to get those and give them to him to read, because, you do have such a good fun style. It's very energetic and usually leans into comedy, and it's just such a fun read. So again, as a fan and the father of a fan, our family very much appreciates your work.
Thanks. That's very nice to hear.
So what can you tell us about, things you may or may not be working on in the future that maybe you can maybe not tell us a lot if you're not allowed to, but you can kind of hint towards? I mean, obviously, as you mentioned, you've got these amazing, link. I forget the actual term for it, but the connecting variant covers that are coming out for X-Men, which is really cool. In your, I guess, homaging X-Men #1, but in your inimitable style, correct?
That is correct. Yeah. I think really that's
what is that process like? When they called you, did they have a specific homage in mind, or they just said, hey, we want you to do a variant? Like, what was that call like?
It was actually the connected covers were a commission that I had done several years ago. But when
really?
Jordan asked, so it was work that was already done. So when Jordan was asking me if I wanted to do these variant covers with Venom, I said, yeah, sure. And I started just sending him just for fun. I was like, hey, check this out. I just started pelting him with these old commissions. And so when he saw the X-Men one, he said, actually, Marvel, is interested in actually running these as variants, if that's cool with you. I'm like, oh no, I don't know if that's cool with me. Of course I said yes.
Well, first of all, whoever gave you that commission, good job on that person.
Yes.
To realize that you'd be able to hit it out of the park, because it is so much fun to look at. Is there any talk of making that a poster, or can they do that because you've already sold the original art? Is there any conflict there, or do you think they would ever do a poster like this? Because I would buy that.
I have no idea how the poster system works there. I think when you see posters out, they're usually licensed. Maybe some poster company goes to Marvel and they pay them for the license. So it's really up to whoever's doing poster companies. And at that point, I don't think there's any restrictions on it. Marvel's paying for the artwork already, so they own it now.
Mm-hmm.
So it's possible if a poster company wants to use that, it could happen. But I don't. Crazier things have happened. I didn't think I was going to get any more Marvel work at all. So here we are.
So are there any other things you can kind of hint towards that you're working on, or things we might be able to see coming out from you in the next year?
Well, after the X-Men covers, I'm not sure what I'm allowed to say, but I have more covers coming after the X-Men ones.
Okay.
Fingers crossed that nothing,
Mm-hmm.
Barring any unforeseen circumstances, to quote Seinfeld again. I should have some more covers coming in 2025.
What do you like? So it's interesting, obviously, because you're, typically an interior guy and you're doing gags and strips and et cetera. So, how do you approach doing just a variant cover? And do you enjoy that work? Because obviously with stretch kind of a different muscle, because now you're doing, a larger splash and you're not doing a tighter kind of, continuity heavy issue in terms of gags, et cetera. So how do you approach doing a variant?
It isn't that complicated so far because they've asked me specifically to just do the homage stuff. So all the Venomore covers are based on Iban Coelho's original covers. So the layouts are there. I just have to figure out how to make my goofy proportions fit that kind of a layout. But I have Iban stuff is so cool and so awesome. It's kind of just like if I can't make that work, then shame on me. So in that regard, it's I just got that target to aim for, and my work's cut out for me.
Your variant number 2 is just so electric, and I love the take on Bedlam, which really feels like it leans really well into your style. But also your interpretation of the Black Costume Spider-Man looks awesome.
Well, thank you very much. Again, these are just these are characters with awesome designs that by people who came before me. So I'm just happy to be able to play with the toys.
Do you find it so? It's interesting. So I mean, obviously, in some ways, because you're doing a direct, parody is not the wrong word. Homage is better. Because you're doing an homage, but in your style, do you find yourself itching to do something more original? Do you find it's more challenging to try and figure out, well, how am I going to adapt this to my style? Like, what kind of thought process do you go through to kind of be like, okay, well, how do I nail this? In which character am I going to exaggerate in this way? Which with this character? Like how much, kind of thumbnailing, et cetera, or, sketching do you have to do before you start to figure out how you're going to break down a specific homage?
It's not that complicated, again, because like I said, I know basically what the layout, what the composition's supposed to be, so it's just a matter of, doing some thumbnails and breaking it all down and figuring out, like, what's the best way to make these goofy proportions fit this space. And
I'm gonna make you pick your favorite of your children now. Which of the 5 Venomore covers was your favorite to do?
It's a good question. Let me look at them real quick.
At least this time, I'm asking about something that's current and not something from 6 years ago.
I really liked number 1, and well, I don't know, man. number 1, I think maybe was the coolest one.
That's a good one. That's a good one. I think 2 might be my favorite, but 1's pretty great.
Yeah. 3 was really fun. 4 was. They're all fun. 5 was really cool. It's just a single figure of like Venom in like outer space glowing, and that's like, I get that and I go like, all right, great. This is just one character. This is cool. But then also you feel like, well, it's because it's so simple. Like if I screw this up, it's like it'd be even more obvious. So it gets more meticulous. The ones with like multiple things going on in the collage pieces sort of thing, it's way more intimidating to attack those at first because I'm like, I don't know how he did this, and I have to figure out how am I going to translate it. But then the payoff at the end, by the end of it, I'm like, okay, it worked, and it feels like it's like a bigger accomplishment.
That makes sense. Now, and I guess you're doing the variant for All New Venom number 1, correct?
Yes. Which was an Adam Kubert piece.
Really? Was it?
Yeah, I did mine based on an Adam Kubert cover.
That's cool. I did like the proportions of the tongue that you've put in.
Well, thanks. Again, I was just copying Adam, so
It's interesting looking at it. And another detail I don't think I noticed, and I guess if I checked Adam's, is that with Venom, you have him sending out 2 tendrils that he's swinging on in each hand. It was just kind of an interesting. Is that in the original, or is that something you added?
Well, I think, Adam had it. like tendrils are coming off of like the suit, like in all different places. And,
Okay.
and I think he had tendrils coming like straight off of the chest, which I wasn't able to make that work. I can't remember if he had it in both hands or not. I may have switched one from the chest to a hand. But,
Yeah,
it looks the spirit of it remains.
I'm looking at the original now. Yeah, no, for sure. It's and again, you made it your own because it was a lot of fun. It has a certain manic energy to it, which really works well with Venom as well.
Venom's still hot, man.
It's only been 35 years, right?
Although this is all new Venom.
He's so young. Oh, all new Venom. Sorry, yes.
This is a mystery character. We don't even know who's wearing the suit at this point.
That is true.
Like I don't even know. I know that the first sketch I sent in to Jordan, he said I had the teeth wrong because I had done the standard like pointy teeth that I've been drawing in all the Venom War covers. And he's like, no, the teeth are different. They're different. Yeah. And I was like, oh, okay. I guess that's a significant detail. So I had to alter the teeth a little bit. I don't know if that's a clue into the real identity.
That's fascinating. I hadn't even thought of that. I don't think I looked at the cover close enough to be like, well, the teeth are different. That's interesting. Yeah. You know what? That's what a good editor will pick up, though, right?
Yeah.
Jordan's a great editor, and obviously he's presiding over the Venom line now. And it sounds like you get along well with him, and hopefully we get to continue seeing more of your variants over on the Venom family.
Yeah, I hope so.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today and to kind of talk about the projects of the last few years. It's been a real joy, and as I said, heartfelt thanks for all the work that you've done. It's provided me and my family with a lot of enjoyment, so a heartfelt thanks to you.
Well, thank you for all the support. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. You have a great evening.
You too.